My name is Dr. Stephen Jones. As an organizational psychologist and executive coach, I love to study what allows people to bring out the best in themselves and others. So join me as I welcome top leaders to uncover the future of leadership. Welcome to the LeaderSHYFT Secret Podcast, where top leaders reveal insights earned, wisdom gained, and transformational moments that have defined and redefined their leadership. I'm your host, Dr. Stephen Jones, and I'm really excited today about our guest, the amazing Mark Cafferty. Mark is an innovator, a servant leader, and a leader who is genuinely interested and curious about people. And so Mark and I are going to spend some time today really working to uncover the secrets of effective leadership. But before we go down that path, let me tell you a little bit more about our guest. Mark is the president and CEO of the San Diego Regional Economic Development Corporation, also known as the Regional EDC. Mark sits at the center of a unique collaboration of business, trade, community, and education leaders who have refined the region's economic development strategy, cementing San Diego as a key stakeholder in the global economy. A Boston native who now considers San Diego home, he earned his bachelor's degree in marketing and communication from Assumption College in Rochester, Massachusetts. That's a mouthful, right?
It's actually Worcester, believe it or not, but it's spelled just like Worcester.
Oh,
so,
wow.
Yeah, it's a strange Massachusetts thing.
Okay.
So, yeah.
And that's one of those, if you know, you know, right?
Absolutely right. Yeah,
Very good. And has an advanced certification in performance management and nonprofit management from Harvard's JFK School of Government. In 2007, Mark was selected as a Center for Social Innovation Fellow for International Nonprofit Leaders at Stanford Graduate School of Business. From 2008 to 2012, Mark served as the President CEO of the San Diego Workforce Partnership. He spent more than 30 years designing systems to support career advancement and economic opportunity for American workers. He resides in San Diego's Point Loma neighborhood with his amazing wife, Charlene Kakimato, and their beautiful sons, Kai and Quinn. Mark absolutely is a family man.
Thank you.
His wife, Charlene, is a dermatologist and former lieutenant commander with the United States Navy.
That's correct.
I have personally experienced Mark as what I like to call a leader's leader.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here.
No, it's always a pleasure to talk to you anyways, and so a pleasure to be here today.
Absolutely. So let's start off, Mark. Let's talk about what is your passion for leadership and making an impact?
It's interesting. I as a young person growing up and early in my career, I have to say, and this is something I try to share with a lot of other young folks coming up in their career, people would tell me they could see me in leadership roles before I could see myself in a leadership role. And I remember a dear mentor and friend of mine years ago telling me, you're going to be a CEO someday, before I had thought it ever even crossed my mind. So for me, leadership was just always about doing. And I really feel like, in my household, sort of in my upbringing, it was definitely a work hard and things will work out. And things don't always work that way for folks. But for me, I have to say I was very lucky and blessed in the sense that as I worked hard, I would constantly find myself surrounded by people. At a young stage in my career, someone said, really watch the people who you admire the most and see what you can take away from them, see what you can learn from them. And I feel like you can learn from people in every situation, good or bad. Yeah. But when it comes to leadership, I think so much of what I still strive to be is based off of the role model that other people set for me.
Yeah, very good, very good. So when you were looking at those role models and learning what not to do as well as what to do, what would you say are one or two key things that fell in the what to do?
Yeah, on that side of the equation, I was really lucky that I walked into a situation with a a leader. Her name was Lois Ann Porter. She was the first woman I had as a boss.
Okay.
And she was so dynamic and so just exciting to be around that what I took away from her is, when you love what you do and you can pass that on to other people, you can motivate them in a different way or at a different level. So with Lois Ann, it was certainly just like the excitement of being around her. I loved being around her. And the second thing is another, kind of leader who I really admired from afar and then worked really closely with after that was the CEO of my then organization, the Boston Private Industry Council. And Neil Sullivan is his name. And he is retiring this year after I think almost like 40 years leading that organization. But what Neil cared so deeply about the community, and you could just feel it in everything. And I think the reason is he started his career as a community organizer. Okay. So he started his career working with people to try to figure out how to help them advance whatever cause they were taking on. And so everything with him was sort of a team sport. You really kind of felt like he was in it with you. And he was a great motivational leader as well. But what I really took away from him was this pride, this deep pride in the work. And when he felt proud about the work, people around him felt proud about the work. And so I think with the two of them is sort of the energy and the pride.
Yeah. Let's stay with that. Leadership mindset. When you think about the mindset that's important for effective leaders to have, what comes to mind for you?
Authenticity. So I really think leadership is an exercise in authenticity. Both of those people, and everyone else I would add to that equation as the people who I've gleaned something from, were authentically themselves. Okay. And that doesn't mean that they were all the same. They were all really different. They had different attributes. But I think authenticity is a really, really important thing that we gravitate to in life. And I think that people gravitate to in leadership. I think you believe in people more when you know that they are authentic. I also feel, you had mentioned earlier a curiosity, right? And so I love being in a leadership role where I'm continuously learning from others, whether it's my board members and partners, whether it's the newest of team members that we have. The moment I think any of us stop thinking we can learn from others is probably the moment we should probably stop leading. Right on. Because I just think so much of it in life is carrying that intellectual curiosity with you. And everywhere we go, everybody who sort of walks through the door, I'm always kind of finding myself excited by learning new things from them. So I think that's one of the pieces that I always look for. When I'm looking for people to be around the table, let's say at EDC these days, in not just board leadership roles, but our executive committee, which is really sort of where they're the closest to the work. They're all amazing. They all have amazing titles. They all have amazing organizations they represent. They all have amazing backgrounds. But what makes them stand out is the quality of the person they are. And so many times that is because of the authenticity and because of the intellectual curiosity and the interest in the work.
Very good, very good. So authenticity, genuineness, right? Curiosity versus perfection. How do you...
Yeah, perfection's a hard one, right? I mean, I think, there's people who, there's people who are great at what they do. And I think there's that always striving to be better. I try to tell our team to remember that like the striving to be better is about sort of, being better today than yesterday. It's not necessarily about being better than the person across from you. And I think too many times that's what we have people striving for. There's a great FDR quote that I've always loved. And he talked years before he was president, actually he was speaking about the economy. And he talked about how competition is effective to a point and no further, but he used the word cooperation. I would use the word collaboration, but he uses the word cooperation, which is what we strive for today, is what picks up where competition leaves off. And what I've always gleaned from that quote is right. Like, the ability for me to try to be better than you or further ahead than you works for me to a point. And then when it doesn't, what do I do? And what you do is you start to work with others. You start to work with people. And then collectively, when you start to see that you're all advancing, you start to realize that that's a greater achievement. And so, those are the pieces that I just kind of, I find it a lot of fun being in a leadership role, surrounded by people who want to try to figure out how we achieve together. I don't know that I would be as excited about it otherwise. I really, if it was purely on being the best organization, being perfect, sort of striving for that. I just think you're setting unattainable goals. And sometimes not measurable goals, to say we want to be the voice of the business community or we want to be the best at what we do. How do you measure that? Versus, we want to make sure that we meet this particular goal by this point in time. And I think of the best leaders, that's how goals are set.
Awesome. A leadership secret, ladies and gentlemen. Collaboration picks up where competition stops.
That's right.
I love that. Yep. I love that. Let's talk about collaboration a little bit more, right? I was doing some work with some young people, and they said, let's double click on that idea. I was like, what is that, right? So let's double click on that idea. Yeah. What do you think, and what have you learned is the key to collaboration? Because I've sat around the amazing circle in the EDC meetings, and there are top leaders throughout San Diego running the major businesses, right, that influence the economy. And yet you and the team at the EDC and the leaders around the table create a culture of collaboration. What do you think is key for leaders to understand their role in building collaboration?
Yeah. I think a simple way to look at it is when I came into my role, there was a really prominent business leader named Dwayne Roth, who you'll remember. And Dwayne passed away, sadly, several years ago. But he instilled in a lot of us, a lot of very memorable thoughts and ideas. One of them was that he always used to say, San Diego needs to collaborate to compete. So when you're talking to private sector leaders and they want to talk about making San Diego the most competitive region it can be, you got to remind them that we only get there by collaboration. Yes. We're not big enough to go it alone. We're big enough to matter. We're big enough to make a mark, but we're not big enough to go it alone. Another great leader said to me when I was starting my role at EDC, he said, Mark, anytime you look at a stage in San Diego and one person is up there claiming credit for something, you're missing significant parts of the picture. He said, when you look on stage and it's filled with people, or it has one person who's constantly pointing out all the people who played a role, that's when you get the accurate picture. And those two things early on at EDC stayed with me, and they were important because when I went from the Workforce Partnership, which is much more of a traditional community-facing nonprofit, to the EDC, which is a nonprofit, but it is funded by the private sector, and as you said, some very big businesses and some very big business leaders. People kept telling me that was going to be a shift. It's going to be too much of a shift for you. And when I got there and I heard those things, it made me realize that it's not going to be that big of a shift. Yes. I think if people can realize that if we're going to succeed, we need to succeed together, then that's the platform that we build off of. And I think what you see, because you've been a part of it, a true part of it, is that what I strive to do is make sure that we are constantly celebrating the collaboration, and we're sort of celebrating any successes as the collaboration. I try to make sure as often as possible, to the degree that I just can't even think of another name, I try to say, who's everyone who is part of this? And so if I'm blasting out a LinkedIn, post, it's usually to say, here's the 9 people who I want to recognize for this one thing that happened recently. And it's interesting, no matter how big and far along we get in our careers and no matter what anyone says, that matters to people. It matters to people to feel that their work is recognized and respected. I think the second thing is we just listen a lot. And I would say maybe one of the most underappreciated things in leadership is listening. Yes. And we learn from listening. And so I think when people are around the table with us, we want them to feel listened to and not just going through the motions. Like if I sit down with you and I ask you for advice and then you watch me days later not taking it, would you give me advice again? Probably not. Maybe a couple times, and then you'd say it's just not worth my time. If you gave me advice and you saw me taking it to heart and trying to figure out how to improve with it, even if I was stumbling, you'd give me advice again. And so I feel like that's what we have around the table is people who are constantly leaning in because they feel heard and they feel like their skills or their background, as diverse as that background may be, is lending something to us moving forward and improving.
So awesome. So another leadership secret. My goal is to mine the gems, right? Fill the stage. Effective leaders fill the stage.
That's a great,
right?
Absolutely right. That's a great quote.
And then another that you said that stands out for me, you said many things that stand out for me, is the leaders listen and learn and then act on that learning.
Yeah. Yep.
Right?
Yeah.
What drives Mark Cafferty?
I just, it's as silly as this may sound, or as cliche as it may sound, is I just want to know that I'm leaving the world somehow better than I found it. And that can be in small ways, and that can be in significant ways. I am very, very lucky to be in the role that I'm in. And I think luck has a lot to do with it. And you and I have talked about these issues before too. Privilege and who I am and where I come from has a lot to do with it. I mean, my parents were hardworking teachers, but both of my parents went to college, and both of my parents had jobs, and both of my parents could help guide me in directions that a lot of the kids who I grew up with, they didn't have parents who came from the same kinds of backgrounds, or maybe didn't have both of them there. And so I never, ever underappreciate for a second the people who have helped me get to where I am. And I always feel like in some way I'm carrying that with me, right? Like I'm carrying that responsibility with me. But I think really what does motivate me, or the people who've motivated me the most in my life, close to me or far from me, are people who I just see truly dedicated to sort of making things better. And it could be making things better for a classroom of kids, or it could be making things better in a workplace, or it could be making things better for a community or a nation. But that's what motivates me the most. I never see myself on that same platform with those people, but I feel like I'm always trying to strive to be there.
Nice. Let's talk about communication, because you put out a good news of the week. Right? And I've seen your social media posts. I view you as someone who is, by the way, I'm a Mark Cafferty fan. I'm just going to say, if you haven't.
Same, works both ways.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So talk a little bit about two things. One, your approach and philosophy around communication. And then two, what do you think is important for leaders to understand around communication? And I'm going to say it this way, both leaders earlier in their career and seasoned leaders as well.
So if I could share 3 moments that I think sort of speak to that. I remember being really young in my career, and it was late, and I was at a copy machine. I thought I was the last person in the office, and I was making copies. And a gentleman named Craig Williams, who was a senior manager in the organization I worked for at the time, walked over to me, put his hand on my shoulder, and he said, "Just want you to know, a bunch of us know you're doing a good job." And I just remember how that made me feel. I was 22 at the time, and I respected Craig a lot. And so just in that moment will stay with me for a long time. When I was leaving that same organization years later, and I had a chance to be in several management roles, I had a young guy walk up to me and said, "You're the only person who would say hello to me when I first started here." And that was sad at first, but I realized that those little things, like a new person in the organization, just having someone say hello. And he said, "Always remember that about you, the only person who would say hi to me every time you saw me." And so I'd kind of leave those situations going, I know how Craig's words made me feel. I know how my words, as small as they may have seemed, made him feel. And then I remember being in San Diego years later. You sort of fast forward, and I was in a bigger leadership role. And I started to recognize that, I was working really hard to make sure from a subject matter perspective, I was always on point. And if I was presenting, I was always on point. But I realized what was seemingly missing in the organization were people feeling appreciated. And so I started to sort of recognize that I didn't remember those earlier moments because of how great my skills were, right? I remembered them because of how someone made me feel or how my words made someone else feel. And so I realized then that maybe my most important role to play in an organization in an authentic way is to really recognize and respect people's contributions. And I think if you do it in an inauthentic way, it doesn't work. So, when we're in a room every single month in our organization, we have an extended team meeting, a little bit longer than our normal team meeting at the end of the month. And we do that just simply to say, does anyone have any gratitude that they want to share with others? And if you go around the table and you make everyone say, who do you appreciate? It's not the same thing. But if you just organically say, could be 2 of you, could be none of you, could be 20 of you, inevitably 20 people speak, because everybody appreciates, and they hear somebody else say something and they want to make sure they're appreciating someone. So those are the things that, that exercise sort of embodies a lot of what I've seen be effective. And when you see my social media posts, I try to be authentic with those too. I don't try to just praise people or places or things. I try to praise the people, places, and things that I think really shine.
Absolutely. Very good. Very good. Let's talk pre-COVID leadership versus post-COVID leadership.
Interesting transition. Yeah.
Right? What are some of the ways you've seen And again, I go to two places where you've seen yourself kind of lead in a pre-COVID way. What shifts, adjustments have you made in a post-COVID way? And then take that to what's important for leaders to also think about in that shift.
Yeah. I think what I learned the most from COVID, I think I felt pretty dialed in as a manager, communicator, listener. And then people got hit with something that affected everyone differently, right? And so how I came out of COVID has no bearing on how someone else came out of COVID, right? And I think I function with the belief that everybody around us is going through more than we realize. And that is always the case. And so COVID just made that more extreme. So when we were coming back from COVID, I just felt like for the first time ever, I would see a young person on our team break down, giving an update. And I would realize that every bit of their work pre-COVID, every bit of their work with us pre-COVID was all about helping businesses grow. Suddenly they were on the phone with people who could barely survive. Like their businesses could barely survive. They actually literally were losing family members. And I realized how isolated some of our young people were. Like they were in their apartments, not going out, not connected to people the way that they were before. And we tried to think like, how can we, in a safe way, sort of replicate some of what we had before? And there was trial and error to try to do that outside in parks and whatever we could do. But I just really feel like the takeaway was listen to your people even more, in the sense that I think it shouldn't take a pandemic for us to recognize that. But I think the worst decisions I've seen businesses make post-pandemic is because a few leaders just want everybody back to the office, or a few leaders have just decided that the workplace should be exactly like it was before. And for so many people, nothing is like it was before. And it may not be for a long time, and it may never be. So I just think you need to take that into account and really think about, collectively what you're hearing from your people. I mean, I really feel a key responsibility for any of us in any management role is to recognize that, everyone spends a lot of time at work, however they define work. And you as a manager can make that better every day or worse. And I think the real responsibility is trying to figure out how you make it better. People who feel supported and people who feel like they're in an environment where folks care about them do better work.
Very good.
I don't care who they are, they do better work. And so to me, the big takeaway, kind of coming back from COVID is listen even more and try to figure out how people, feel that the situations that they're going through are understood and respected, and how you continue to just incentivize them to be contributing in the ways that they can to advance whatever the mission of your organization may be.
Very good. Excellent. You're bringing to mind for me, as I'm listening to you, 3 key components and skills. Leaders have to care. Leaders have to have the skill of empathy. And the skill of emotional intelligence.
I believe that truly. Absolutely. But you and I talked before, and what's funny is how many leaders don't think they need those things. Right. So that's the thing that I was talking to you earlier, and I'll kind of repeat what I said. I hear in a lot of surrounding me, not everyone surrounding me, but in places, I'll hear a lot of folks who say something to the extent of, I don't care if people like me. I only care if they respect me. As a leader, my job is to get things done. It's not to be your friend. And I kind of stop and think in my life, trying to think through everything. Who have I respected that I don't like, right? Who do I believe in who I don't like? And I don't mean they need to be your best friend, but like you don't look up to somebody who you don't like. I really don't feel like you do, or you don't for very long. Like you might say, well, that person's great at X, but there's always sort of the but after it. And I really feel like what you just mentioned to me is at the core of leadership. And when people realize that how important empathy is in life and also in the workplace, and how important understanding is, in life and in the workplace, I think that they have the foundation behind them to be a much, much better leader.
Yes. Very good. Very good. So let's talk about the other end of that, of effective leadership, which is ineffective leadership, right? What are some pitfalls, potholes, like places where you see leaders just kind of tank unintentionally?
I think it's when you get caught up in the title and you get caught up in the vibe of being a leader, right? Like I'll hear people say, I'm a serial entrepreneur. And some people are. Like some people have started several companies and they thrive off of that. Other people like the world to think that's who they are, right? Or it goes back to sort of like the statements about leadership that really have to do with getting things done and meeting goals and beating the competition, as opposed to thinking how you create an environment that people can thrive in. So I feel like I've watched a lot of good people sort of get caught up in, wanting to tell you how many people they manage.
Yes.
Like, this is how big, did you know my organization is so much bigger than yours? And you stop and kind of go, okay. Yeah. And hopefully that is, you get the right staff structure in place to do what you need to do. You hear a lot of other people get sort of very caught up in the titles. I'll even see, like, I'll be somewhere and someone will get introduced and they'll correct somebody because they really want to make sure. And look, if you are a doctor and you've gone to school forever to earn that title, then by all means, we should introduce you that way. But like, if someone calls you president and forgets the CEO, or CEO and forgets the president, I think the world knows who you are.
That's right.
And so I just feel like there's just a bit of that status that people get caught up in. And I think when you do, you lose a little bit of what probably got you there. And there's that old saying that people don't follow titles, they follow leaders. That's and right. when people confuse that, and people confuse it a lot, I think that's when they start to run into some challenges and some problems. The other thing that I think is, and sometimes this is not intentional, I think you see it a lot in the nonprofit world, is this, sometimes people will refer to it as like founder syndrome. And other times people will, actually Jim Collins wrote about it and called it the genius with 1,000 helpers. So the idea that like there's a really great, charismatic, smart person, and the business has been built around that person's ideas and sometimes mission and sometimes their hard work. But then it becomes a business, and you got to realize that the business is not about the person anymore. And it's not about his or her mission. And it's about how do you empower other people to do it even when you're not there. That's right. And so many times what you see in the creation of a great community program is a leader walk away and the program crumbles.
That's right.
Or in an organization where you had sort of like a really charismatic, great person at a podium who could motivate folks, and the moment that person's gone, doesn't feel like the same organization anymore. And I think that's a leadership flaw. And I think even, again, Collins refers to it as like this curse of charisma. Oftentimes we think the person who's up front motivating us is the only kind of leader, right? And oftentimes, if you're really thinking straight and you're I look at, like, if I can motivate people, I probably can't do 9 other things as well as other people around me. So how do I make sure we round that out as a leadership team, as opposed to thinking that sort of like my style is what everybody should adapt to? And so those are the pitfalls that I've seen. I think sometimes, honestly, you and I have seen it. Sometimes some just not so good people wind up in leadership, right? Like, they're bullies, or they're loud, or they push their way to the front of the line. I mean, I feel like we're seeing that, on a national and global stage these days. And sooner or later that doesn't work. I don't care how long it takes. Sooner or later things crumble.
That's right. That's right. I think about this idea of the culture of personality, right? Versus, and I've worked with some organizations where relationship and loyalty become the currency versus competency and contributions.
Yeah, absolutely right. That's a great point too.
Right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Very good. Very good. Where do you refuel?
I refuel with my family a lot, and you know me well. So when my boys were younger, I always remember the stage. They started playing flag football. I grew up playing a lot of football and played football in high school and college, and was always a good football player, good enough to make whatever team I needed to be on, never a star. But I loved football and grew frustrated with it at the same time. The frustration was in something not dissimilar to what we're talking about. The frustration was in sort of a little bit of a toxic nature that can creep into football, and oftentimes football coaches. This need to yell at kids constantly, this need to kind of break them down to build them up. And if you're training Marines, have at it. But when you're talking to 9-year-old kids, I don't care who you are. They don't need to be screamed at to learn. In fact, I don't think most of them, fear is a motivator to a point, but it's not the motivator. So I was watching my sons play flag football, and I was complaining about the coaching constantly. And Charlene said to me, then you should coach. I said, I don't have time to coach. And she said, well, then make the time to coach. How long are they going to be young enough for you to coach them? So from the time my sons and their friends were about, I don't know, probably 8 or 9 years old until they hit about 7th grade. A friend of mine, another dad, and who had played some football too, he and I just coached the boys. And we coached them through COVID. Even when there was no season, we would still set things up like a practice to give them some normalcy. And I love those years. So like nothing refueled me quite like that. I mean, sitting and watching either of my sons play baseball refuels me. Doing anything, traveling with my wife, spending time with her, it refuels me. But I have to say I'm lucky. I just going to work. Like I really do. I love our team. I love the environment we've created. I'm a really lucky person in the sense that I don't ever leave work feeling drained.
Nice.
I head into work most days pretty excited about something that's on the calendar. And so I urge everyone to take the vacation time that you should take.
Yes.
Take the mental health time that you need. Know that work is not everything. But when you can find joy in work, it makes all of it balance out a little bit better.
Very good. Very good. I think there are some people who have been taught or believe that when you hit a certain level, status, or stage in life, that fear goes away. Right?
Yep.
And self-doubt goes away.
Yeah.
How do you manage? Do you deal with, manage fear, self-doubt?
Yeah, I feel like it's almost the opposite. When I was younger, I think I wasn't smart enough to be afraid of some things, right? Like that's some of what, I remember people saying like, what were you afraid of when you were 22? And I'm thinking, not much. But now you think differently. Like I feel responsibility for my team. I feel responsibility for the things that we tell our board and our investors that we're going to do. I really take that piece seriously. I feel a different responsibility for my family, and my sons, and even in a lot of ways the young people around them. Like so I do feel like the fear is just different, right? It doesn't go away. I don't know what anyone tells you. I actually think more than anyone would realize with me, the self-doubt doesn't go away either.
Yes.
Everyone says, oh gosh, you love being up on a stage, you love talking in front of people. There isn't a minute that I go up on a stage where I'm not thinking, like, what if I don't deliver? Yes. And I think that probably helps keep me sharp to some degree, because I always want to make sure, I'll leave the smallest of presentations, and if I feel like I didn't meet the mark, I'll pick it apart the whole ride back to wherever, to the office. But if I just make a small presentation somewhere and I really think I met the mark, I'll come home that night and I'll tell Charlene about it. Like I still feel that way. So I feel like, I don't know if self-doubt is maybe a little bit of something that you've got to embrace, more than fear. Yes. And so I think you realize in time, it just is one of those things that helps keep you measured, and it helps keep you level. So
very good, very good. LeaderSHYFT Secret. Substitute fear with exploring the feeling of responsibility, right? That I really appreciated the way I heard you use the I feel like, right? I feel, so that this idea of acknowledging the feeling, which we know fear is, but the idea of unpacking what's the responsibility that you're committed to.
If you hear people say fear is a great motivator, right? And I think maybe in some people it is. I think forcing that, and fear can really harm people too, right? So I think it's sort of figuring out like your threshold. And if somebody has, I've one of my sons, has a lot more anxiety than the other son, and so I know that there's certain things that are gonna rattle him more than they will rattle his brother. And I think that's the same for all of us. But I do think, teaching any young person coming up in their career and an aspiring leader that the fear is going to go away, I think is it's not accurate. Yes. And I think however they figure out how to embrace it and make it work for them and accept it on their terms. And again, it's that authenticity. Like sometimes when people, when someone's nervous, they can still deliver a great presentation. They can still motivate people. And almost the nervousness of it makes it like, that it's real. Yeah. So I just think don't ever pull away from what's real. Yeah. I at a very young age, I always remember, it's a funny comparison, but I remember someone coming in. I worked with a dynamic group of people, and we all worked in high schools. And when you were talking to a classroom of high school kids, you had to work really hard to keep their respect and their focus. And then this person came in who was a professional speaker. And she was telling all of us, hold your hands this way when you speak and point this way and look this way. And I was watching all these great people who I had seen deliver great presentations suddenly look just terrible in front of me, trying to follow like a sort of robotic script. And what I realized was they were not being themselves. And the moment that person stepped out of the room, a great leader and manager for us at the time said, I wouldn't listen to that. I would just keep doing what you're doing and become comfortable in how you deliver.
Yes.
Just keep becoming more and more comfortable in how you deliver. And don't worry about your hands and don't worry about like the phrases. And everybody went back and just kind of continued to thrive.
Very good. Excellent. I'm very aware that as two men, we're talking about fear and self-doubt and I'm thinking a lot about how gender bias, where many women who experience that fear and self-doubt get the label of imposter syndrome or struggling with imposter syndrome versus being human, right? Means one part. Being human means that fear, that self-doubt is part of our human condition. We know bias, gender bias, adds when we trip on our fear, we get a little more room to recover.
No, I agree 100%. And when I said earlier, the privilege that I acknowledge is, not only that I had support, but it was that, people would look at me and my sister and for whatever reason, pick me first. And that's, I don't look back and realize it was because I had an ounce of talent more than her in any way. It was just because people would think for whatever reason in this particular role, Mark's a male. And that, I have this conversation all the time. My organization well. The two amazing leaders who I lead with, Nakia Clark and Laurie Saba, are tremendous leaders. And I think that for them and so many people like them, it is significantly harder. These things are significantly harder. I get breaks and I get passes that they will never get. Whether it's because they won't give those breaks and passes to themselves or because the world won't give it to them. I don't care what anyone tells me. I mean, I argue with men about this all the time. Is that my mother was the most competent, amazing, brilliant person I knew, and she always was sort of the assistant principal, the deputy superintendent. She was always in very important roles because she was so good. But she was never in the role because it was always a guy in the role. And what I would watch for a lot of years is my mom just prop that guy up, and really make him succeed. And I never saw her, regret it. But I almost think it got her to a point where she didn't necessarily think she could have been the person, right? She was always going to be the great person behind the person. And some people like that. Like some people like to be the behind the scenes person. But when we just don't even give someone the opportunity. That's right. And I think that's what women run into in leadership all the time. Nakia and I were talking one day, and I quote Jim Collins in Good to Great a lot. And there is a part in the book where it talks about great leadership that I believe fully in this. And it is that when you want to find great leaders, you look at where great work is being done, but no one's clamoring to take the credit, and that's where you find great leaders. And Nakia was the first person to say to me, unless you're a woman. And in a lot of instances, when great work's being done and no one's taking the credit, nobody swoops in and says, this woman who's at the heart of it is the leader. They look around and find somebody else who's willing to take some of the credit. Right. And I think that is where that was the day I sort of even shifted in how I read that book and how I looked at its teachings, in the sense that I can say those things and they land for me, but then I realized that all the leaders that they're talking about were all men as well. And so the commonality is not just from leaders, it's from male leaders. And so I think that those are the things that are always really top of mind for me when I'm trying to think about, listening and understanding. And I appreciate you bringing that up because I think that is a really, really important thing for folks to know.
And we just want to be real clear. We're not mansplaining.
Yeah.
We're just communicating our learnings and our lessons, right?
Yeah, no, and I think in a lot of ways, just like listening and just trying to share the observation, right? Like trying to share the observation. So
it's very good, very good. So what's one piece of leadership advice that was unpopular but true that you've heard?
Unpopular. That's a really good question. I think the most unpopular decisions that I've seen people make and stand behind, and that are very, very hard, tend to be when you have to stand on principle for something, even when the other side of the equation is maybe not necessarily not principled, right? Like, so it's easy when things are good and bad. I mean, I always say to someone, when someone has wronged you, dealing with that person is easy. I mean, because you know that you're not dealing with someone. But when someone is a close friend or colleague, an ally, and you have to go in a different direction or stand up to them, that's harder. And it can cause a lot of us to cave, right? It can cause, or to try to, collaborate to a point where you might not actually even get to the outcome that you're looking for. Or collaborate is probably not the right word, but just like balance things. So I think some of the most unpopular decisions that I've seen people make that were right, I can't think of any one specific to share in a story, but I think that what jumps out to me is those moments when I know somebody had to sort of stand up to other principled thinkers and other principled players, believing that they were right and doing the right thing, and then just really sort of having the strength to do that. It's a different kind of strength.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. And I'm thinking about when you said other principled, and I'm thinking about this idea of othering versus belonging. Right? Yep. And I know the EDC has made a commitment to inclusive growth.
Yeah, that's probably the greatest example of what you're talking about, I think, is in what we're seeing now. So you and I had talked earlier. We made a commitment. You were a big part of this. We made a commitment to trying to figure out how to strive for a future with economic development planning and programming that was more inclusive in nature. Just recognizing that even as this economy has grown and surged, it has left more and more people behind. And oftentimes the strategies behind that were intentional. They were to intentionally support some and not all. So how do you try to create a future where your economic development programming and strategies are inclusive and are embracing? And we found a lot of support for that. We found a lot of support in leadership in San Diego. We found a lot of people who didn't quite know how to do it but wanted to lean into it with us. We found some good like-minded cities across the country to learn from. We found the folks at Brookings. And as I said to you before, and we had an environment nationally where that was supported. We're now in a place where the environment for all of that is no longer supported nationally. And individually, you're seeing a lot of people have to pull back from it. And as I said to you before, we're getting a lot of, I still want to be part of this, but I have to change some language. I still want to be part of this, but I can't be in this room. I think this is where you're going to see a lot of maybe unpopular decisions that are the right decision that people have to make, right? Or depending on where the popularity is aimed, they may be popular whether people can acknowledge them or not. One of the things that I really take great, optimism and even some level of pride in is that a lot of folks have said, I can't speak as overtly to these things or put things in writing on my website for fear of what might happen. But if EDC could stay the course, with me being part of EDC, I'll feel like I'm still, rowing in that direction. And I feel like we're, uniquely positioned to try to, be a voice that helps to speak right now for some folks who can't quite speak the way they would have 3-4 years ago.
That's right. I think the importance of all communities being served, all communities being given an opportunity, all communities, right? That idea of assessing, right, and continuing to do the work that says all are welcome.
Absolutely.
Here is and all have the ability to develop and grow can be a really powerful message that traverses the times.
Yeah, absolutely right.
That we're in. I think that's so important. Where is Mark Cafferty learning and growing these days?
From the people around me. I really feel like it's from the people around me. I mean, I went to the TED conference recently, and
where was that?
That one was the international one in Vancouver. Okay, and it was just next level by way of speakers and presenters, and just the way that the communication was. But it just reminds you of the best folks you see around you all the time, right? It gives you the same feeling that you get from a conversation with a really great colleague. I read a lot. I read as much as I can. I don't read as much as I used to before my sons came along or when they were younger, because as I'm trek into so many baseball games and things these days, but I try to read as much as I can. And when a colleague or friend sends me something, that's when it will kind of like pique my interest a little bit more, because I almost feel like it's been curated for me a little bit, right? Somebody who I like or who I think I like is kind of sending something my way. So I try to make sure. There's a lot of misinformation out there these days. I try to make sure I find reliable sources, but I just anywhere and everywhere I can just keep learning.
Very good, very good. The topic of trust comes to mind, right?
Oh yeah.
How do you? Because I'm thinking about the range of industries, right? That you work with, right, and lead, and San Diego economy and beyond, right?
Yeah.
What are 1 to 2 key behaviors or actions that you have seen effective leaders demonstrate to increase and gain trust?
Yeah. Again, I think it is, it's taking those moments where if you're listening to someone or seeking their advice or even getting direction from them, is that they see you take it and do something with it, right? And so I remember when I first came into EDC, and it seemed like such a challenging thing to some people, and it was just, to me, it was sort of like music to my ears. But Debbie Reed, who was the former CEO of Sempra, was the chair when I came in. She's the chair who hired me. And she said to me, you need to define an economic development agenda. And you need to tell us how you're going to measure it, and you need to measure it. And I said, okay, what do you think that should look like? And she said, it doesn't matter what I think it should look like. You need to define economic. So she was kind of giving me marching orders. But what she did is she gave us a platform to be able to say to people, we're a team of 20 or so. And on your behalf, as 150, 200 investors, here's what we think we can do to move the needle in the economy. Here's what we will strive to do. Does this sound right to you? And when people say yes, then those are our marching orders. And then come back at the end of the year and say, not just that the economy was great this year, but we did or we didn't meet the mark, right? And I think there's so many of us who are afraid to step into a room and say we didn't meet the goal, right? I think where trust is established in a really, really significant way is when you hear someone stand up and say, we didn't meet the goal, and let me tell you why. Let me tell you either how we did something wrong, or we didn't take something into account, or how we'll do something differently next time. If you penalize someone for something like that, you're not going to have an honest, trustworthy relationship. If you listen to somebody and embrace that and recognize that the best of plans don't always work out, but that the planning becomes invaluable in how we sort of move through the process, I think that can help to establish a lot of business-related trust in our personal lives, and in the way that sometimes those personal relationships become critical in a business environment. I think when you've got to remember that if you're in a position to deliver for people, you do. And if you're in a position to where things don't work out and you're in a leadership role, you establish a lot of trust when you take ownership of that. And you establish a lot of distrust when you try to find scapegoats. And I think that's a rule in life, right? That's just the way that life and relationships should be. But in work, even more so. I think there's way too many times where someone is too willing to throw a team, a person under the bus, for their own benefit. And again, that stuff's all short-lived, because when you behave that way, what goes around eventually comes around.
It connects to the genuineness, and the word that we've been talking about but haven't named is vulnerability.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's a key part of effective leadership, right?
Yep.
Yes. We're coming to the end of our time, but I'm thinking about vulnerability. Talk to a new leader that is just kind of getting their chops and their legs on their leadership journey. What would you advise them around vulnerability?
That vulnerability, embrace it, right? I mean, I think the reality is, if anyone's telling you that appearing vulnerable or being vulnerable is a weakness, it's not. And I think, again, the people who we want to support the most are the people who stand up sometimes and say, I don't have it all figured out. And I need your help to get there, right? Or we tried this and it didn't work, and I need to know that you'll be there with me again, right? And you'll step forward for those people when you believe that you're listening to someone who authentically cares and tried, right? But I think the reality in being vulnerable is especially when you're in a leadership role, is it reminds everyone that you're all human.
Yeah.
Like we're all human, right? And it doesn't start to separate you out from people because you're in a leadership role because somehow you are better than they are,
Yes.
right? You're in a leadership role because circumstances put you there and
Yes.
because you worked hard for it and because you've delivered, but that you also recognize that if circumstances hadn't worked out, if things had gone in a different direction. And I think when people see honesty and they feel integrity and they feel authenticity and they see vulnerability, they'll embrace it.
Yes.
And when people embrace those things and they embrace your ability to do things with them and to do things together becomes significantly stronger.
Yeah, very good, very good. I just thought as I was listening to you, I was thinking to myself, and underlying and an umbrella over everything we've talked about is bring your best.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
Doesn't mean be the best. Be your best.
Yep.
Right. And that is part of where the rubber meets the road as well.
Yeah.
Right.
No, and we'll never be perfect, right?
Yes.
You and I, you're a great presenter, and you'll never deliver the perfect presentation,
That's right?
But you'll always try.
That's right.
And I think the thing that people will appreciate is the work, the thought that goes into it, right? And how it's received by the crowd. And I think that's the thing I would leave with a lot of people is, day in and day out, you're never going to be perfect. And for certain people, fair or unfair, the climb is steeper. And if your climb is not that steep, help the people whose climb is steeper, because you're going to need their help someday.
That's right.
And you're going to hope that you help them in the right moments and that they're there for you. And that's, at the end of the day, that's what teamwork is about. I think that's how families succeed, right? And I think that's how businesses and leadership succeeds, is by really, recognizing that, to requote Muhammad Ali, who is, one of my favorite thinkers of all time, but he'll always say the shortest poem, ever was he stood up on the stage at Harvard at a graduation and said, "Me, we." That was it. Me, we, right? And to me, what that's always meant is sort of like, you can't have the first without the second.
That's right.
I mean, so like I'm only as good as part of the whole.
Very good. Very good. Mark, I know we can continue talking for
Yeah,
a
for
while.
hours.
hours. It has been a pleasure.
Always.
Absolutely
yeah. Same,
a pleasure.
Same. Yep.
We are really, really excited that you have tuned in to watch this amazing dialogue with Mark Cafferty, President and CEO of the San Diego Regional EDC. We're going to ask you to like, subscribe, and share the LeaderSHYFT Secret Podcast. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, and we will work to continue to bring you amazing episodes with top leaders to really support your leadership journey. Thank you all, and we'll see you soon.